Despite the attempt at establishing science, technology, engineering, and math education in the United States, the U.S. ranks 25th among nations in the world with science knowledge. Join me today when I talk with Carolina Kaufman about the Field Museum's programs to tap into youth curiosity using technology, art, and interaction with the staff and scientists at the Field Museum. Welcome to the Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Lee Artz. I'm joined today by my guest, Carolina Kaufman, who is the Digital Learning Coordinator at the Field Museum in Chicago. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Lee.
We hope to talk about youth education, technology, art, and science today.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to it.
I want to start with just a quick question about science. It seems like we live in a time in this country where science is has the same status as magic, science fiction. I mean, you go outside and it's snowing in the middle of April and people will say so much for global warming. I mean, how do we, as a scientist, I mean, I know you went to Harvard Graduate School of Education to study technology, but as a scientist, how do you answer people's question when they just look at the world that they live in and say, well, there's no relation between sugar and obesity or global warming and snow in the middle of April? I mean, how do you address that big fundamental question?
Sure. Well, that's a great question, and it's something that we often talk about, especially in the last couple of years where this idea of the post-truth era or, facts have been questioned, and that's something that the museum cares deeply about. And just last year, when we did the March for Science, this was a really important way of us saying, facts do matter, and please come to the table and have a conversation with us. And I had the same kind of conversations with young people at the museum or who came to the museum to talk about, what does it mean to be a critical consumer? And why does that matter for, your life and for your future?
So how are we going to make an argument? Because somebody could say, well, I believe this, and I believe this because we've always done it and it seems to work out. Or I believe this and I believe it because the Pope or some other authority figure says it, versus what you're saying is facts. Because if you argue about facts, how can you make an argument that this set of facts drawn from science has some more value than this set of facts drawn from what we've always done?
Sure, yeah. Well, one of the things that I like to think about is building a community of learning. And what does that mean to have a community of respect, a community where communication can be open? So I think everything is on the table in terms of what people might believe in or care strongly about. And when it comes to young people, I think we make sure and establish that community and communication happens openly, happens respectfully, and happens in a way that where judgment can be replaced with wonder, and really just that's an opportunity for asking questions, and that's a very scientific process.
Well, talk to me about the scientific process. What makes a scientific claim to truth different than any other claim to truth? I mean, really, what does it make it? Why is science science as opposed to just another way of seeing the world? I mean, what does science offer that some other way, non-judgmentally, tells us this is the way the world is?
With curiosity comes questions. And with those questions, there might be more questions that might come up. And that's something that happens in science. But it also happens in expression of art, in expression of religion or beliefs. So I think there's a lot of commonality there. And we live in an era where we're starting to recognize that science and art are actually more similar than they're not. The idea that you're discovering through experimentation. They share that together, I think. And I think that that's important to recognize both as a scientist or as someone interested in science, as well as somebody who might have a different opinion about science.
Okay, again, I'm still troubled. I'm sorry to keep putting you on the spot here, but I'm still troubled. So if I draw a picture as an artist, like you have the cards here that you use for the Youth Museum, and we'll get to those in a minute. My depiction that might be a Pokemon card, and I say this character lives, versus a scientific explanation that it lived and now it's extinct, it has some basis in fact,
Sure.
but as opposed to basis in my depiction of that. And I'm not disputing the value of art as part of our human condition, but I'm trying to get the difference between a scientific claim and an artistic claim or a belief claim, I guess.
Well, scientific claim is based off of evidence. And that is something that is done over many, many periods of years. It could take in the form of comparing, what did that animal do 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago, and what are sort of some of the impacts that animal might be facing in relation to human encounters or population growth, in terms of human population growth, the conditions that might change over time. And those are things that scientists do all the time in terms of doing their research and looking for evidence and patterns. And that, I would say, is slightly different than, say, an artist's rendition of a particular animal. But certainly, visual art can help visualize what that might have looked like. And so it helps to bring in other audiences into the conversation and into the understanding of what science is.
Yeah, no, I like that. I appreciate that because it's a question of what's there, what we discover, what we can demonstrate.
Correct.
You can go find it just as easily as I can if you are asking the same questions.
Correct.
And then we can share a conversation about what we've discovered. Now, the role of art for me is also interesting, and this is one of the big things that you do at the Field Museum when you're working with youth, because art may be a way of communicating what we have discovered or maybe triggering the curiosity, so people may want to discover that. What's the program that you are?
Sure. Actually, all of our programs infuse some kind of visual engagement, are using art in terms of creating, expressing oneself creatively. And I think what's interesting is, for example, we just did a program last week over spring break where we invited young people to come and learn about character illustration.
Caroline, I want to push it a little bit more, maybe put you on the spot, because what the Field Museum is doing is outstanding. I just heard a report recently about the top schools in Chicago and how people have to plan years in advance to try to get their students into Whitney Young or some other school. And I'm just wondering, with the number of students that come, how many black students, how many Latino students, how many students are coming from those schools that don't have a quality science program? So when you're talking about voices, how do we reach those? Because it seems to me that everybody's capable of learning, everybody's capable of contributing, but if the structure of the larger educational system doesn't even get us to the museum, is there anything the museum can do, or is thinking about how to kind of break that social obstacle?
Sure. Well, diversity and inclusion is a very important topic in museums now, and it's actually very close to my heart. I'm a Latino woman. I'm in science and technology field, and I also speak Spanish fluently. And so I have a strong belief that making connections with the greater community is incredibly important to bring the diversity that we hope to have. But that is out there, but they might not be aware of that. And one of the ways that we do this is through various partnerships within Chicago that can reach those young people that we're seeking. So
social service agencies, community groups, the museums partnering with them, for example.
So for example, the city of Chicago has the Chicago City of Learning group, which allows young people to tap into immediately through their schools what kind of opportunities are available online, and again directly from their teachers, what kind of opportunities are available throughout the city in many hundreds and hundreds of organizations. So that's one example. And they're also tapped into the Chicago public school system, which is important to us because we want to reach those schools.
So does that somehow feed into the museum programs or interface with the museum programs?
It allows us to be put visually on a map for them, and that because they can reach that more directly through their own communities, then it's harder for us to go to every single school, right? We can do what we can with our 3-person team, which is a strong and mighty team, but that is one area that we rely very much on community partnerships. Chicago Hive is another network of youth-oriented
Well, one of the things I would just observe is that the museum may not be able to fulfill all those science needs, but certainly can provide a model with the programs that you're doing that can be replicated, maybe not with the quality or the technology that's there, but it still provides a model of how to engage students through art and the humanities with science in a student-driven with the
Correct.
proper, and so this can become a model for that. So that's also inspiring. These are very impressive. I always find it incredibly engaging to have art that somehow connects with other aspects of life. So you did these cards, and they're trading cards, or they're cards that show their artistic ability with their scientific understanding. Some of these have the Latin names and what they are. And so you did this in an afternoon, right, with 6,000 students? And, I mean, how did this come about, and what is it?
Sure.
What is this program?
Sure. I mean, well, it comes from my own passion in art, but I think more importantly, that the museum has so much variety of collections. There's so many different ways that you can look and interpret them. And this was just one way to do that. This was actually a 2-day program. It's actually one of our shorter term programs. Okay. Sometimes we have 1-day programs. But this was a 2-day experience for young people to, again, go behind the scenes with the scientists, learn about mammals, choose a mammal of interest, draw it,
so
then create.
Each student would do their own.
They would create whatever it is they were interested in.
So we'd get trash babies and the possum, or we'd get the Libyan skunk.
Correct.
Okay, I'm sorry, Libyan weasel. See, yeah. That tells you what I know.
And they came in with a variety of experiences in art as well. Some of them didn't know how to draw or didn't know how to use digital tools to render them further. So it really was a very open-ended experience for them.
So this is a long ways from Harvard and the grad school of education where you're studying technology and art, and somehow you end up at the Field Museum. So maybe you can give me some other examples of how that blending of technology or the digital learning is connected with the Field Museum and
Sure.
both the displays and the materials and the other staff in the museum.
Sure. I think one way that we think about technology in the museum is what are the ways that we can expand access, or how we want to express our ideas with a variety of tools. Now, technology is also not the focus necessarily. Like I said, for example, this is about trading card of mammals, yeah. And that was the focus of this program. We have other programs where technology, again, serves as sort of the backdrop. For example, yes. For example, we have a 6-week internship in the summer that is actually very scientifically sort of deeply engaged in research of scientific ideas.
So do students apply for this, or do you go out
Yes.
and find, how many students are in that program?
They apply. We actually only have 6 positions available. It is a paid internship. So unlike this program, which was a free program for 2 days,
and how many
is
students
a
would come
program.
to something like this?
This was about 15 per session,
okay.
And we had 2 sessions.
Okay.
Yeah. And then for the digital learning internship, which is a more extensive, intensive program for high school students, we hire them, we select them, we interview them, of course, and then we select 6. This year we've had over 75 applicants.
Oh, wow.
So we have a lot to look through. There are a lot of young people very interested, not only obviously in finding work and new experiences, yeah. for themselves, but that really want to engage in science in new and interesting ways. And digital media is part of that experience. But this internship focuses on exploring the plant and insect collection, and then out of that exploration and engagement with scientists in those areas, they're going to be able to design and create their own mobile-based game that is actually going to be within the galleries of our museum. So you're working off of playing
cards and games and other things that will attract interest in science. You have some other things. I'm curious about what you brought.
Sure. So this is just it's called a beacon, and this is a technology that allows you to communicate information from the beacon with the program that they've designed, the mobile game that they've designed. For example, last year we did it on plants.
This communicates how?
So this is actually in the galleries, hidden within like an area, let's say a hotspot, if you will. And that hotspot will trigger if you're on the phone and you have the mobile game, and last year's called Seeds for Survival.
Where this happened at the museum?
This happened in the museum. This was our internship last year, and we're repeating it again this summer. But they use this technology so that they can then program offsite using a programming language called Tailblazer, which is out of the MIT Media Lab. And they programmed an experience to learn about plants, but through, again, their own creativity, their own way of storytelling.
Will that be something that goes beyond the students that are in the, I mean, is it a program that then would be available for other people that visit and other students that do this?
Yes.
So it's not just for them and that?
No, they are designing, and this is what makes this internship very interesting. They are designing for the public. And this is actually something that's integrated in our plant hall currently. So you can go down to the plant hall, download Tailblazer, put in the game code, and play a game and learn about plants in the process.
Okay.
And they're the ones that actually coded it, designed it, produced it from scratch.
And anybody that goes to the museum can download it, and then they'll be able to go out in their backyard and be able to look at it.
Well, it is, since it's a mobile-based game, it's actually based off of going into the collection and in the
okay,
galleries. This is an
okay.
in-gallery
Okay.
mobile experience.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
Yeah.
Technology
very
that's
exciting.
not technology that's not passive. Technology that's interactive. Okay.
Correct. Correct.
That's not technology. Well, it's technology, but it's certainly not a digital. Is that a game that was?
Yeah, so this was a game made by a young person in the museum who created a board game based off of their experience in going into the Vikings exhibit we had a few years ago. And he actually made this 3D printed object. He 3D modeled it.
Did you do that at the museum? Or
Yeah, we have 3D printers. But again, it comes back down to, again, their ideas. And in this case, he wanted to create a tactile piece for his game, a game piece. And it was inspired by one of the gods.
One of the Viking gods.
By one of the Viking gods. So this is their board game, and he also designed the board behind it. And he probably worked with another person or another team member to do this. But again, another way that technology is used to express ideas inspired by the collection, and using it in ways that we've entered the digital world here, but we've come back out with a physical experience. Yeah. And that's very important that they had that opportunity to do
presumably
that.
Science isn't all about a virtual world, because that's science fiction. It has to come back to the real world. But it's interesting that you can blend some of the latest technology and the interests that students have.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, this was a 2-day. This was an internship. That's an internship. You have 2 groups of 15 students, 30 students. It's not thousands, but still. Yeah. And it's a paid internship. I didn't know that the Field Museum had that kind of resource. I thought museums were, like most public institutions, under a budget crunch. So how is this possible? I mean, are there community supporters? Are there other funders or donors? Or
we do have funders that help. We also do some of these things based off of grants. So, for example, the NSF has helped support some of our programs. Correct, the National Science Foundation. So we've been very fortunate that we can sort of really experiment and come up with ideas and integrate them in interesting ways, so that young people can sort of get into meaning making about their ideas, and again about the collection, in such ways like this game program, or the digital illustrated projects that they made here, or the internship. And then also we actually have a year-long experience for young people, leadership program called Youth Council. And what's interesting about this group of people, they are committed to be at the museum once a month for a year.
They plan to go to science after they graduate high school.
They're very interested in science. They're very interested in being active contributors to society. And I think they have sort of passions in different areas of science, as well as sort of anthropology or cultural studies. And so this group is different than other programs that I've run, because they are actually designing programs for young people for the museum. They host a speaker series called Curiosity, in which they select a field museum scientist of interest and pair them up with somebody in a different career. So just this past January, for example, they selected a field museum scientist who works in DNA research with sharks, Kevin Feldheim, and he was paired up with an FBI agent to be on stage with the young people, moderated by the teens, to learn about their careers. So this brought it to another level of understanding what kinds of careers are out there, what are ways that you can engage both in science and in other areas, and what commonalities can they have with each other. So it was interesting, for example, for Kevin to talk about his work in terms of what does it mean to work with sharks in the field versus an FBI agent working with,
other kinds of sharks.
Related kind of, exactly.
Well,
so that was very interesting for them.
This is inspiring, because right now there seems to be a push. I would argue nationwide, higher education, but certainly in public education, to cut out things that are extraneous to the education of career building for students, so that we don't need art, we don't need music, we don't need dance, we need STEM. We need science, technology, engineering, and math, and that's what will make America great or whatever. This seems like a different thing. I mean, I know in some high schools they try to add art, so they call it STEAM. But this, what the museum's doing, seems to be something that's not parallel and not challenging STEM, but approaching science in a wholly different way that says you can't understand science just with a STEM appreciation, but you have to understand it with art and design and experience, which is a whole different way of approaching it. So,
I couldn't agree with you more, Lee, and I think I want to add that the experiences that we try to bring to young people in the museum, inspired by the collection, is meant to be interconnected and interdisciplinary. It can all relate to each other. And that, I think, brings deeper meaning in the experience, both with the objects, with the scientists. We want to bridge those connections with young people through their interests, through their passions, and as well through the interests of what is it that's happening at the museum in terms of research and science. And the young people that can connect with those scientists that are actually doing this. Learning can happen anywhere at any time, and that's what we're excited about at the museum.
This is exciting. The one question I would have is, I don't know how many, 300,000, 600,000, I'm not sure the number of public school students in the city of Chicago, or even others. And if you're bringing, I mean, what could you envision for the future of the field? More groups of 15 or something larger, or making connections with the schools where you go to the schools as opposed to selecting students to come? I mean, what's your vision of what science education might look like that the field could contribute to?
Sure. Well, I think, again, this idea of fueling a journey of discovery, which is now the newest sort of rendition of our mission at the museum, is something that I care.
That's the museum's new mission?
Yes, and that's just part of it, in order to come up with solutions for a brighter future, both rich in nature and culture. And that really rings very deeply in my work, because I think, again, we want to build a continuum of experience, not just with high schoolers, but with younger kids, all the way up through college and beyond, that they can come back as lifelong learners, that they can appreciate that their voice was heard, and that their voice has meaning. Because essentially, the young people that come to the museum or that participated in our programs, they're inheriting the earth. They're the ones to take on the stewardship of the planet, and we want their voice to be heard. It matters.
How will you expand that voice? Again, I'm thinking
yes.
Great programs, but I'm envisioning people watching this program would think, I'm in Hammond, I'm in Gary, I'm in East Chicago, I'd like to participate in that. But if you're saying we have 15 and we have 75 people, I mean, how does that get open so there's more participation, more opportunity? Is the field imagining expanding the programs, or is this it?
Yeah, we're always looking for ways to expand and, again, adapt to both audience needs and interests. We are looking at different ways that we can reach audiences online, for example. One example is in our botany collection.
Put all the cards online.
Yep, sure, why not? Trade them online if you want.
Got to catch them all.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say that with our botany collection, for example, there's the ability to participate in citizen science from anywhere, anytime, to support scientific research in our mosses collection, for example, and contribute to the documentation of our science collections. And that technology is able to do that for us, which is wonderful and amazing. And
maybe the students can develop a technology that makes that possible. I heard recently that the south side and west side of Chicago, the communities have been given mobile devices to check the quality of their air so that they can decide air pollution. And some of these things that you're talking about that the students have done in conjunction with the field are expanding beyond what happens just in the field. I don't know how that would happen, but it's inspiring, and I'm sure we could talk about these programs and more, and maybe you can come back and join us in a not too distant future. I'm glad you're here.
Would be great.
Carolina Kaufman from the Field Museum. That's all the time we have. I'm sorry. Thank you for joining me today on Roundtable Perspective. I'm Lee Artz, I'll see you next time, and we'll talk about the field and youth education and technology and the importance of science.
That sounds
Thank
great.
you, Carolina.